You're listening to Evidence for Faith here on WIBG 1020. The subject of today's show is God's blessing of liberty and prosperity on America, and our solemn obligation to preserve that blessing intact for our children and grandchildren. Hi, my name is Peter Boyce. I'm a born-again Christian, not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm also the Constitution Party Congressional Candidate for New Jersey's 2nd District, running against incumbent Frank LoBiondo and Democrat challenger Gary Stein. I was invited to substitute for co-hosts Keith Kendricks and Dr. Larakis, who couldn't be here today. I'm often invited as a keynote speaker to the Tea Party groups throughout South Jersey and other groups such as Liberty and Prosperity in Atlantic County. I give educational PowerPoint presentations on the Constitution and its practical applications to the critical challenges facing America. These organizations and the Constitution Party are often portrayed by the major media as far right-wing. However, at all these meetings, the focus is always on the U.S. Constitution and how to get congressmen to restrain their legislative passions to the boundaries prescribed therein. Think about it. Our Constitution is the document both the Democrats on the left and the Republicans on the right both swear to uphold and defend. That puts these groups, and most particularly the Constitution Party, squarely in the center of the political spectrum. We are the grassroots common ground, bringing concerned Americans of all political stripes back to the principles that made America great. Let me begin with the basics. The bedrock upon which America flourished to become the flame of liberty, radiating hope to an oppressed world, is articulated in the second paragraph of our Declaration of Independence. Now, we've all heard these words. Now listen. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, we've all heard those words, but what do they mean? First of all, they mean there is a God, and He gives us individual rights. That is why they're unalienable, because they come from God, not from government as revocable privileges. That as individuals, we delegate some of our God-given authority to form a government to protect those rights, and nothing more. Edmund Burke said, "The essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government." Let me repeat that. The essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. Not no government, that's anarchy. Rather, just the minimum amount of government necessary to protect our rights and otherwise stay off our backs and out of our pockets. This great experiment in individual liberty was codified in our U.S. Constitution, a document referred to by many of the founders as a miracle. America is often referred to in derision as a capitalist country. Well, the definition of capital is the means of production. In other words, tools, machinery, tractors, factories, and most importantly, land. But wait, don't socialist and communist countries also use tools, factories, and land as their means of production to barely feed their own people? Sure they do. So if both systems use capital, what is the critical difference that enabled America to use its capital to produce more wealth of goods and services in our short history than all the other nations of the world combined ever produced? Here's the difference. When Karl Marx was asked to sum up communism in one phrase, his answer was, the abolition of private property. That means all the means of production under the control of the central government. It's just the opposite in America. The God-given rights of individuals to own and apply capital, the means of production, for their own individual pursuit of happiness, are protected from government control by the Constitution. There is no greater motivation for an individual to produce than the knowledge that he or she will be able to keep the fruits of their labor for their children and their local community. I'm proud to say that I've been a capitalist since I was 7 years old. My older brothers and I used to pick nightcrawler worms in the park at night with a flashlight and a cigar box to sell for a penny each to a sporting goods store. 1,000 worms earned me $10 worth of happiness. For me as a 7-year-old capitalist, my flashlight and cigar box were my capital, the means of production. My picking worms for a penny each was my pursuit of happiness. That was the America of the 1950s. But things have gradually changed to where America is now facing a crisis on every front, and these fronts are converging. To name just a few, we have the highest rate of unemployment since the Great Depression, courtesy of an alphabet soup of unconstitutional regulatory agencies and international trade agreements. Many U.S. companies have been forced to close up shop and reopen in Mexico, India, China, Pakistan, laying off millions of Americans. We have an almost $14 trillion national debt, yet we continue to borrow money to give it away as foreign aid, bailouts, and other unconstitutional spending. Remember the verse, the borrower is servant to the lender? We are indenturing future generations of America's children and grandchildren to our main creditors, Saudi Arabia and Communist China. Despite the constitutional requirement of the federal government to protect the states against invasion, 20 to 40 million illegal intruders have crossed our borders, creating a crime wave, overburdening our social services and taking even more jobs from American citizens. Our modern presidents, regardless of party, no longer request declarations of war from Congress as required by the Constitution. We have instead become subservient to United Nations resolutions on when, where, and how we deploy our own U.S. troops. These undefined, undeclared, unending wars are spreading our military thin and costing precious American lives. We're dependent on foreign oil, importing over 70% of our energy needs. Yet we have massive reserves in our western states that dwarf those of Saudi Arabia. We also invented and pioneered nuclear energy, yet we are not tapping those reserves, nor have any new nuclear power plants come online in over 30 years, all due to unconstitutional usurpation of states' rights in direct violation of the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. This is the short list of liberties lost. How in the world did this happen? It happened the same way that it happened in ancient Israel. The prophet Hosea lamented, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." We have lost the understanding of our founding principles. During the good times, we did not insist that our elected legislators honor their oaths to uphold and defend our sacred Constitution. The American people, we, the people, have forgotten that the Constitution is not a law to control the people, but rather to control the government. Our failure to hold our legislators accountable to the clear limits of the Constitution permitted them to legislate beyond just protecting our God-given rights. They began to provide ever-increasing social services as a means of buying their re-election at the expense of the taxpayers' children. If the foundations be destroyed, what shall the righteous do? Thomas Jefferson warned us. He said, "In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." But how many elected leaders and voters even bother to read it? Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution clearly enumerates those specific areas in which the Congress is authorized to legislate. The Constitution, like the Ten Commandments, is an absolute. When a congressman swears a solemn oath to defend it, he is to defend every word of it. It is not a set of suggestions. He does not swear to defend it only when it's politically correct or supported by the major media or lobbyists or special interests or multinational corporations. He is to obey it 100% of the time. There are two sides to what I call the freedom equation. On the government side, the U.S. Constitution is to restrain the legislative passions of Congress to within its prescribed boundaries of simply protecting our God-given rights and leaving us free to pursue happiness. On the individual side, we have the freedom to go about our business pursuing happiness, but with that liberty comes the personal responsibility to exercise internal moral restraints to not violate the rights of others. John Adams summed up the equation with the words, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." This is the miracle our founding fathers envisioned as they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to give us the American dream. Let's open the phone lines and discuss how to rescue the American dream for our children and grandchildren. You're invited to call WIBG Studio. The phone number is 609-398-1020. Again, that's 609-398-1020.